that we're in an unusual situation. People were trying to keep WIPP from opening, and then it opened in 1999, and oh well, it's going to keep operating. Well, guess what? It's been shut down for more than a year. It can be shut down for a lot longer than that, and as we're going to talk in a few minutes, there are real reasons to not open it up and to be talking about why to open it up in the first place. So I'm briefly going to talk about what's going on with WIPP and the opportunities, particularly next week, next Wednesday, for people to be directly involved and to have an impact. As Ray also mentioned, there's this, we'll talk briefly about this idea of bringing commercial spent fuel into New Mexico, and then we'll have time for questions. So one of the questions for tonight is, will EPA recertify WIPP? We're going to talk about what recertification is here in a minute, but EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, and one of the questions is EPA going to protect us or protect the Department of Energy? So, WIPP. Many of you know about WIPP, but just briefly, WIPP is a site in southeastern New Mexico between Carlsbad and Hobbs. The idea is there are buildings on the surface where nuclear waste comes in. There are 4 shafts, as you see on this, an air shaft, a salt shaft, the waste hoist shaft, and the exhaust shaft from the surface to 2,150 feet below the ground where the waste is in place. And as you can see, waste has been in place in those rooms that are called panels. The green one where the red dot is talks about panel 7, the February 14th accident. We'll be talking about that in a second. And so this is the idea of what WIPP is supposed to do. It's supposed to get waste, take it underground where it's going to be safe, and as people have already mentioned, it was never going to leak. Oops. So what is WIPP's mission? And WIPP has a 4-part mission when it started out. The first point is it's supposed to start clean and stay clean. Well, that part of the mission, it hasn't worked out so well. It has a limit, 175,000 cubic meters of defense transuranic waste. Transuranic waste, plutonium-contaminated waste for making nuclear bombs. So it's always had a limited mission. It's not supposed to be the nation's only nuclear dump site. It's supposed to be a dump for some particular aspects of it. Secondly, to operate, since none of the waste when WIPP started was here, it had to be transported through more than 20 states without accidents or releases. Thirdly, the reason to do that is to move plutonium-contaminated waste from Department of Energy nuclear weapons sites to clean them up, send it to New Mexico. And fourthly, the WIPP site is supposed to be eventually closed, decontaminated, and decommissioned. So WIPP opened on March 26, 1999, and for almost 15 years, you can see almost 11,900 truckloads of waste came from around the country to WIPP. More than 91,000 cubic meters of waste was put in those underground rooms. CH waste is contact-handled waste. RH waste is remote-handled waste, as the name implies. Contact-handled, you can walk up to the drums. Remote-handled waste, you can't. They have to be handled remotely. A total of more than 171,000 containers of waste are in those underground rooms that we talked about. Next slide. So, what's the Environmental Protection Agency have to do with any of this? EPA has 2 pretty unique roles when it comes to WIPP. And EPA is going to be, officials from EPA are going to be here in Albuquerque next Wednesday. So we're going to talk about what their role is and what folks can do next Wednesday when they're here. So EPA has 2 roles. One is to certify that WIPP will be safe for 10,000 years after it's closed up, that there won't be releases. And so EPA first did that in 1998. The law also says that then every 5 years thereafter, the Department of Energy has to show that it continues to meet these requirements. So the first recertification application was 5 years after opening, 2004, 2009, 2014, 5 years later. So we're going to be talking about what's in that 2014 application and why EPA is going to be here next week to talk about it. The second role EPA has is to try to ensure that during the operational phase, while WIPP is operating, the radiation doses to the public, as you can see, are less than 25 millirem to the whole body, less than 75 millirem annually to any other organ. EPA was not monitoring at the time of the radiation release in February of 2014, and we'll talk about that more in a second. Their modeling after the fact said that 0.005 millirems to the public at Smith Ranch, about 4 miles from the WIPP site, is all that was there, so that's why they've said what happened last year didn't violate these annual release standards. But what did happen in February of last year? This vehicle in the underground that was hauling salt caught on fire, and as a result of that fire, next slide, this is the salt shaft, one of those shafts that we saw. The smoke came from 2,150 feet underground where that salt truck was burning up the salt shaft and into the environment. Next slide. There were 86 workers underground when the fire broke out. They were all evacuated. 13 of them, however, were treated for smoke inhalation. One of them is still disabled because of severe smoke inhalation that he had. Why did this happen? Well, the Department of Energy itself said it happened because of pervasive lack of maintenance. Equipment wasn't replaced. That truck that burned was 29 years old. Workers weren't adequately trained, which none of these events should have happened with the fire. The emergency response wasn't good. The fire wasn't supposed to come out. The salt shaft workers weren't supposed to be exposed, etc. And the mine safety practices weren't adequate. WIPP is both a mine, mines are dangerous, and it's also a nuclear facility. So it has two kinds of safety problems. Next slide. No, that's okay. Okay, so that was February 5th of last year. 9 days later, the only operating underground radiation monitor here alarmed after 11 o'clock at night on Valentine's Day. There weren't any workers underground. Remember, because of the fire, everybody had to be evacuated, etc., etc. So fortunately, there weren't people underground when this radiation alarm went off. And as you can see, where the radiation alarm went off is about 2,300 feet away from where the truck fire was. Next slide. The Department of Energy assured us, back to a point that Ray made about they always tell us everything is okay. The Department of Energy, even after the radiation release happened, were saying on February 15th and 16th, and these are direct quotes from them, no personnel were contaminated, no contamination on the surface, no equipment contaminated, no threat to anybody. This is what they said over and over and over, because their radiation monitoring said that was true. Next slide. So at the time that this happened, radiation monitoring on the surface, EPA wasn't doing any monitoring. The Environment Department that had radiation monitoring at the WIPP site for more than 15 years before WIPP was operating had shut down its radiation monitoring. So the only independent radiation monitoring that was going on was from the Carlsbad Environmental Monitoring and Research Center. And they announced on February 19th, 4.5 days after the release, that their air samplers on the surface showed that there was contamination from the waste underground that was on the surface. So 4.5 days after the event, DOE assured nothing had leaked out. That was not true. Next slide. So as a result of, oh, there's radioactivity on the surface, maybe we need to test the people who were on the surface at the time of the accident. Well, that was 13 people. All of them subsequently determined to have internal radiation contamination. Every single one of them, including the security guards who were a long ways away from where the release happened. It took 12 days, February 26th, after they were exposed before the workers were told about that. However, there hasn't been continuing testing of them and no medical treatment for them because the estimations are that they got less than a 10 milligram internal dose. Next slide. Because DOE was so confident that there was no release on the surface, in addition to those 13 workers that were on the surface at the time, they let 135 more workers come to work on Saturday morning. And it ended up that of those workers that came, 9 more of them also were contaminated on the surface. And you will notice that it was, in one case, it was late as May 15th. In other words, 3 months after he was contaminated before the worker was even notified that he was contaminated. Again, there hasn't been any ongoing testing or medical treatment because the quote-unquote estimates are that they got a less than 10 milligram dose. Next slide. So that brings us back to what's happening next week. The RCA is the recertification application of the Department of Energy. Remember we talked about DOE in 2014 put in an application to say WIPP is still fine. Notice they submitted that application on March 26, 2014. March 26, 2014, more than 5 weeks, more than 6 weeks after the fire, more than 5 weeks after the radiation release. Do you think this document, thousands of pages in this document, mention the radiation release or the fact that WIPP is shut down? Answer is no. So we're talking about a document that doesn't address what the current situation actually is. This is one of the things we want to talk about. So a couple of other things that just to mention, it includes panels 9 and 10. DOE is not planning to do that anymore. DOE's plan to reopen WIPP includes putting in a new ventilation system and a new exhaust shaft because of all the contamination. The application doesn't mention that. And it doesn't mention whether DOE thinks they can reopen WIPP without EPA first recertifying. Next slide. Okay, so what is the situation? So this is the area where the waste was that caused release. This is where the radiation monitor that I mentioned was. So in theory, the radiation went where the blue and red are. So it went out the ventilation, through the exhaust shaft, and out to the surface. That's in theory what happened to what was released. But you notice all of this area in yellow is also contaminated with radioactivity. It has still never been explained how so much radioactivity got into some other areas of the line. So now the entire area where they are working is contaminated. Again, this isn't mentioned in DOE's application. Next slide. So EPA is coming next Wednesday. Next Wednesday they'll be at the Embassy Suites, the big high-rise hotel right at I-25 in Lomas. It's easy to find. There are 2 different sessions going on. They're both public sessions. People can come to either one or both. The 2:30 to 6 in the afternoon is going to be a what we call a roundtable discussion, where there'll be a big table, people from EPA, people from DOE, DOE's contractors, people from the public, whoever wants to, can sit around the table and have some detailed discussions about these issues. So it's not the kind of hearing sometimes you think about where you come and somebody says and nobody responds. This is a very interactive kind of thing. And some of us will be asking, Sylviana talked about me having my little debates and discussions last week with DOE people. There'll be several of us that will be doing that, and any of you that want to join in are welcome to do that. And from 7 to 9 at night next Wednesday, there's going to be more of what people are used to seeing, where you get to stand up and make comments. So people are encouraged to participate in either or both of those, because part of what we want to show is there are a lot of people who are concerned about what's going on, and who don't think WIPP should be reopened, and who don't think EPA should be recertified. Next slide. So, things that people can say. EPA should protect us. Environmental Protection Agency. Who are you protecting, EPA? Don't recertify WIPP. EPA should be saying WIPP can't be reopened because we haven't recertified, and we don't know how long it's going to take for us to recertify. And then some other things I mentioned. The application doesn't discuss the radiation release at all, let alone the causes of it, the impacts, the underground contamination, the fact that they're changing how the repository works, and they need to change the waste characterization requirements. In theory, EPA knows what's in those 171,000 containers in the underground, because they're supposed to be tested at the sites before they're shipped to WIPP. But one of the things even Los Alamos admits, the drums that, one or more drums that blew up in the WIPP underground, they don't really know for sure what's in those drums. So that brings us back to is the whole system actually working? Next slide. Okay, so related to this is, if you remember that first slide, there were sort of these 8 areas that I call panels where they put waste. 6 of them are filled up. They were starting to use the 7th one. It's gotten contaminated. The 8th one is mining. And what's still supposed to go into WIPP? DOE says there's still a lot of this plutonium-contaminated waste. More than 62,000 cubic meters of contact-handled waste at these 12 sites around the country. And moreover, next slide, there are also more than 5,600 cubic meters of the remote-handled waste, the more highly radioactive waste, at these 10 sites around the country. Does that waste fit into the remaining areas in the WIPP underground? Next slide. Answer no. So you can see, and there are lots of numbers, but bottom line is there's at least this amount of capacity shortfall. So WIPP, if it were to reopen, can't even accomplish the mission that it was designed to do, let alone the fact that it's already violated the Start Clean, Stay Clean provision. So what's the reason to reopen it? Next slide.
Kill the planet.
So why reopen it? Well, if it's going to reopen, and if they're going to put the waste in it that was supposed to come, they're going to have to enlarge the facility, because there's not enough room in the existing underground for what they say they're going to bring. But DOE also has several proposals, 7 of them here, to expand WIPP for other reasons. Not for the plutonium-contaminated waste, but for some of the Hanford, Washington high-level waste. For greater than Class C commercial waste, highly radioactive commercial waste at power plants. West Valley, New York commercial waste, surplus plutonium. Even proposals to bring 10,000 tons of mercury to store on the surface. Even ideas to say, well, if we can't put the transuranic waste underground at WIPP, what could we do? We could bring it and just stick it on the surface at WIPP. Or to have heater tests to prove that the WIPP site would be safe for high-level defense waste. All of those expansions are prohibited by existing laws, importantly to note. Next slide. So what's EPA going to do? What's EPA going to do? We're going to get to questions in a minute. I'm going to quit shortly, and then we'll come back to questions. So what's EPA going to do? Well, we know they're going to think about what people tell them next week. They're going to ask DOE for more information because it's obvious not just to me, but to EPA and even DOE itself that the application doesn't talk about all these things that we just mentioned. So EPA is starting to ask DOE for more information. At some point, EPA will say, okay, now that we've gotten a lot more information, the application is complete. And then from that time, there's 6 months before EPA actually decides what they're going to do. And somewhere during that period, there will be an end to the comment period. So people have a chance to comment next week. You have a chance for several months to comment in writing. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So the other subject, excuse me, to talk about quickly that again Ray mentioned, on April 12th, less than 2 months ago, Governor Martinez wrote a letter, and she didn't do a press conference about the letter. She didn't release publicly that she had sent this letter, but she sent a letter to the Secretary of Energy saying, I support the ELEA, the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance, which we'll get to in a minute, and its member cities and counties, so that's Eddy and Lee County, Hobbs and Carlsbad cities, in their efforts to establish a consolidated interim storage facility in southeastern New Mexico. Consolidated interim storage for what? Commercial spent fuel, up to all of the spent fuel at all the power plants in the country. So this is a proposal that the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance has. Next slide. So where is this stuff? More than 70,000 metric tons of commercial spent fuel at these red dots, nuclear power plants around the country. Those of us here in New Mexico always like to point out that if you look at where the red dots are, and you draw a line at the 100th meridian, more than 90% of the power plants, more than 90% of the spent fuel are in the eastern part of the country. Huh. Wonder why those folks don't want to keep their spent fuel. So this is where it is. Next slide. And it's at the power plants, it's in pools like this, because when the fuel comes out of the reactor, it is too thermally hot and too highly radioactive to do anything other than put it in water. So it's shielded, it's cooled, and it's shielded for 5 years or more. And then at many power plants, it's also now put in these casks that are called dry casks because they're air cooled rather than water cooled. So this is where commercial spent fuel is now. Next slide. A better way would be to leave it in dry storage at the power plants, but with better containment of the dry cask rather than moving it around or sending it someplace else. So this is HOS, hardened on-site storage. This is a concept that a lot of folks, including CARD and Southwest Research and people all over the country have supported. Instead of these so-called interim storage sites or sending it to another bad geologic repository site, Yucca Mountain is that. Next slide. So, next question. Can the governor do this? Can the governor just say, all of this spent fuel is coming to New Mexico? Well, the good news is the answer to that is no. Why not? Federal law says no. New Mexicans oppose it. Previous proposals has failed. There was a proposal to do exactly this on the Mescalero land in the 90s, and that was rejected by people. The Eddie Lee Alliance, the same people we're talking about, got together with the French company Areva in 2012 saying they were going to do it there. That failed. There's a site in Utah called Private Fuel Storage that even got a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to be consolidated storage. It hasn't operated and it won't. And sites in a number of other states that have been proposed have all been rejected for a reason or another.
Tell me again what ELEA is.
Eddie Lee Energy Alliance. It's a limited liability corporation formed by the county governments of Eddy County, Lee County, and the 2 cities of Carlsbad and Hobbs. They bought a worthless piece of land more than 10 years ago to promote it being used for a nuclear facility, and now they've been trying to find a use for this piece of land so that they don't look like elected officials who've wasted taxpayers' money and gotten nothing out of it.
That doesn't matter.
That doesn't matter, but it did in Eddy and Lee County. Next slide. So, what can we do about this bad proposal from the governor? Tell her no. Tell the congressional delegation, remember I mentioned a major reason this can't happen is federal law says it can't happen. So who has to change the law? The governor doesn't get to change the law in Washington. The governor is not insignificant, and what she's saying is important and bad news for us, but we can counter it. But the congressional delegation are more important players in this than the governor is. We can organize against this, letters to the editor, engage social media, talk to friends and family, do lots of other things. So there are things we can do about that to stop this bad idea once again. Okay, next slide. This is the last slide. This is how you get in touch with me if you want to get in touch with me. Now, questions and discussion of things that we've talked about, either with WIPP or the spent fuel issues. Mimi.
I have 2 questions. One regarding the ELEA. What is the federal law that keeps Martinez from doing anything? And my other question is, several slides back, you had a list of possible additional alternative uses for WIPP, everything from surface storage to storing of it.
Right.
Well, who's making all those proposals?
Department of Energy.
And they're on paper?
Yes, all
formally
of them are on paper. Most of them actually have environmental impact statements in process. So we'll go back. Mark, can you scroll back up to that slide? Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going.
It's not going down.
There you go. Keep going.
Wait.
Keep going. Keep going, keep going. Whoa, I think that's fire.
I think you passed it.
Yeah.
I'm going forward the other way. There it is.
There we go. Right here. Okay, so the Hanford high-level waste, the greater than Class C waste, the West Valley, the surplus plutonium, the mercury storage, they're all Department of Energy environmental impact statements that are in process right now as we speak. So they're very formal proposals that they have. The true waste storage issue, they haven't formally said they're going to do that, but when Ray mentioned the $73 million in the great agreement between the state and DOE on the WIPP and Los Alamos suit, one of the things that DOE got from that is in one of the sections of that agreement it says that the state Environment Department will expeditiously consider a proposal to do this. So they haven't actually submitted the proposal, but DOE for a few shekels, as Ray put it, is saying, you know, let us consider this one too. And the heater test is something that they've been trying to do at WIPP for a number of years. They've mined out part of the underground and we're trying to get this done when the radiation release happened. So all of these are Department of Energy formal proposals for WIPP.
But they're not part of the WIPP recertification application.
They're not part of the WIPP recertification, except I would argue that a legitimate question for the recertification is your recertification for what's going to happen. Is it really just for the 60,000 cubic meters of plutonium contaminated waste that you've told us all along, and oh, by the way, it doesn't fit? Or if we're going to spend all this time, effort, and money to get WIPP reopened and to make it bigger, is part of the idea to do some or all of these things as well. So I would argue it's not, none of these things are part of the DOE application, but you will hear me, and I'm glad for anybody else to chime in next Wednesday to EPA, to talk to DOE about it, because what I've said publicly and privately to DOE folks is you've got to eliminate all of these proposals. If you think you're going to reopen, you need to stop saying you could do any of those things. In my view, it should be a precondition for two reasons. None of these are part of WIP's mission, and two, I've been arguing long before 2014, because they wanted to do all these things, is a direct cause of what happened. Because management attention, time, effort, and money was going to not to make WIPP operate safely, but to figure out how we can expand WIPP. So if the management, if you're a worker and your management is telling you safety of the facility isn't what's important, getting new missions for the facility is what's important, what happens to the safety kind of measures? So I think it's irresponsible to even talk about WIPP being able to safely reopen if you're also going to say it's going to do all these other things. Yeah. Right. Hold on. I think Cecilia has a microphone so we can all hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what close?
You mentioned earlier that there was a recertification report, I think. Was that DOE or it was DOE that put that out? Anyway, so it looks like we can't trust DOE to put out a complete report.
Yes, and again, the way the system works, DOE is supposed to put in an application. If the application is insufficient and incomplete, EPA can't really deal with it.
Okay.
So we're in the process right now. The reason EPA is coming next week is to hear whether people think that this incomplete, insufficient application is okay or not. So everybody can and should tell them, no, it's not okay.
Okay, relative to EPA, do they know about, well, they must know about the recertification report that's put together by DOE, and has EPA commented in any way to the public or to DOE?
Yes, EPA so far has sent 3 letters to DOE saying we need a lot more information. Your application is not complete. And DOE is in the process of answering some of those EPA requests for information. As I mentioned, one of the things that should happen as a result of some of the comments that people are going to make next week is EPA is going to say, oh, there are some additional questions that you guys at DOE need to answer. Because in some cases, the DOE folks are going to be at the table next Wednesday afternoon, and we're going to ask them the question, is this information in the recertification application? DOE, of course, is going to say, no, it's not. Oh, okay. So next week is actually a time we can also demonstrate and get DOE to admit that there are problems with their application.
So what you've said so far leaves me no reason to trust EPA and maybe even question, DOE, and maybe even question what's happening with EPA.
So EPA hasn't done as good a job as they should have been doing for the last 15 years. There's no question about that. But do government officials, and I will not direct this at Ray because he knows too much about it. Do public officials ever do the right thing if people don't tell them what the right thing is to do?
Rarely.
Pretty rarely. So EPA are paid by the taxpayers. They are supposed to work for us. They are supposed to protect us. They are supposed to pay attention to us.
And DOE?
And DOE too. We need to tell them what they should be doing. Next week is a chance to talk to them face to face here in Albuquerque. There are a number of high-ranking WIPP and WIPP contractor officials that are going to be here. There are a number of EPA officials from Washington, D.C. who are going to be here. So it's an opportunity to talk to them directly and let them know what people's concerns are.
I just want to say thank you for keeping us up to date on what's going on and what has been going on.
So I think Deborah wanted to go and then Ray.
I have two questions, but one is really short. I was just wondering whether the Haas storage, does that have to be cooled? Like, do they have to run the electrical lines to it to cool it? They have to keep it up, or it just stands alone? Oh, that's...
Yeah, one of the advantages that people argue about the Haas facility is it's air-cooled, so you don't have to have moving parts. So in terms of the idea of Haas is, this waste at power plants, Diablo Canyon in an earthquake zone in California, is that a good place? Reactors on rivers that can have floods. The Callaway plant in Nebraska got flooded a couple of years ago. So, rather than move the waste away from these places that need, and having all the transportation problem, it needs to stay there, but it needs to be safer stored so that you don't have the flood problem, you don't have airplane terrorism crashes, you don't have the tornado wind kind of problems being such a severe problem.
So my real question is about the fines that Landell and WIPP paid, $73 or $77 million. It was interesting when you said that there was this other condition, because I thought it was bad just on its face. But I'm wondering if there are other conditions like that are bad. Plus, they say that a big part of this fine for Landell comes out of cleanup. Now, WIPP is also cleanup. So it strikes me that the total cleanup budget is going to pay the fine and to deal with the nitrate drums, the shake and bake drums, as I call them, and and WIPP itself. So is there anything left over for cleaning up the rest of Landell? So we're the ones that are really getting to pay the bill.
So Secretary Flynn always brags, and the governor always brags about the fact that none of the $73 million is supposed to come out of cleanup funding. It's not supposed to come out of the existing Landell cleanup budget or the WIPP cleanup budget. It's supposed to come out of some other secret funds that the Department of Energy has hidden away someplace. So, that's iffy on its face. But also, it's not Secretary Flynn and Governor Martinez, or even the Department of Energy, that decides what money Congress appropriates or not for cleanup. So if folks in Congress decide, oh, well, you've spent $73 million on this other thing, and we're going to take it out of next year's cleanup funding, there isn't anything that the governor or Secretary Flynn could do about that. So this is all not such a good deal as they want to tell you. One of the other provisions that is bad about the agreement is that Los Alamos and DOE and the state of New Mexico in 2005, during the Richardson administration, signed a consent order that specific things would be done at Los Alamos by December 31st, 2015. So they gave DOE a 10-year period to work on some very specific cleanup of Los Alamos. Well, guess what? December 31, 2015 is not too far away, and have all the cleanup that's supposed to have been done? No. Under that order, DOE Landell faced fines and penalties for missing those deadlines. So guess what is also in this agreement that was signed? That the Environment Department agreed that they would not do any fines for violations of the consent order. So one of the provisions of this settlement agreement on the fines is that the consent order, this order that's been in place for the last 10 years, through December 31, 2015, the Environment Department will waive, not do any fines for violations of that consent order. The small amount of fines that had already been issued have been forgiven. So DOE specifically doesn't have to pay those, and the Environment Department has promised they won't impose any new fines for violations of the consent order. What has to happen, obviously, is that order has to get renegotiated. So that's something else that's going to have to happen. But, you know, the fact that they're going to miss all of these requirements December 31, 2015, no harm, no foul, no penalty. Great.
Are you on? They must have known I was up next.
The magic microphone. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you so much. I've heard a lot of this information from you before. It's always good to hear it again because it's so important for us to know this. And thank you for sharing it. I think the way you do it is a way that all of us can understand it for one. And the other is that the passion with which you presented is also appreciated. One of the things that I keep thinking about, I know it was a reference to one of your slides, and that's Sandia. Not very many people are talking about Sandia. You're one of the few. But as you know, that mixed waste pit, or whatever they're calling it now, all they've done is throw dirt over it. What's happening there? And you know, I know that Dave McCoy and other folks have talked about it. Just recently, about a month ago, we passed a resolution, and I was able to pass a resolution asking that that be looked into and that a report be brought back to the Water Authority. I don't expect a whole lot of depth to it, but at least it's the beginning for us to start talking about that. And a lot of folks here have worked on that. And at least it's the beginning.
Yeah, a lot of people here have worked on that. I was looking for Janet, who I don't see right now. I was going to let her do it.
She's having some work at the moment today.
Okay. I was going to have her do a quick little thing. There are a variety of people who are continuing to work on the mixed waste landfill. Janet has regular, actually monthly meetings that are going on of people related to that. So there is good work going on. When she comes in, I'll let her talk a little bit more about it. But yeah, Sandia mostly deals with, and those people who are concerned about the radioactivity at Sandia have good reason. Sandia mostly works on the non-nuclear parts of the nuclear bombs, however. So that's why you've got toxic chemical problems and some radioactivity. So Sandia doesn't show up very much here because Sandia has sent only 5 shipments of waste to WIPP and has very little plutonium-contaminated waste that's supposed to go to WIPP. So WIPP, whether WIPP reopens or not, isn't really going to help the waste situation in Sandia. So that's just one of the things, just to make the point. You wanted to come and then...
Yeah, my quick question was just, my question was pretty quick. It was just a matter of, do you have this PowerPoint online or anything?
It'll be on the Southwest Research and Information website tomorrow. So
cool.
sric.org, you'll be able to find it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
In reference to the mixed waste landfill, the hearings on that are going to be July 8th. So if you talk to Janet, you can find out when and where, but it's on July 8th.
Actually,
Okay, so-
wait, about that, I was at 2 meetings about mixed waste landfill, and we got some new information that there is high-level waste in the landfill, and it just became known to us recently, and they've been denying it all along. So what we're doing is we're trying to have a meeting on the 30th of this month, and it's going to be a speaker and dinner to open this up and let people know before they go to the hearing, so they know what's going on and what has to be said. The hearing is going to be on in July 8th, and it's going to be at the Albuquerque International
the little museum at 9 o'clock in the morning. So a lot of things are moving on that.
So if people are interested in that, talk to Susan or Janet or other people here tonight who can help with that. So one question that was asked that Mimi asked about the federal law. So there are several federal laws. The specific federal law that doesn't allow this is called the Nuclear Waste Policy Act.
Is what?
Nuclear Waste Policy Act that Congress passed in 1992, and it specifically says that it's the Department of Energy, the federal government, that has to handle the disposal of commercial spent fuel. And so the idea that a private facility like the Eddie Lee Alliance facility could temporarily store waste or permanently store waste, since there's no disposal site for it, that's something that is actually excluded by current law. There are, as you might imagine, there are people in Washington that are trying to change that provision of the law. I was just in Washington 3 weeks ago, and one provision of the law that would change that was coming up. I had about 30 minutes face-to-face with Senator Udall, who's on the committee, about that, and he actually sponsored an amendment to strike that provision because he is opposed, and he will continue fighting those kind of provisions. So again, in terms of talking to the congressional delegation, that's what I'm talking about. But both of our senators are currently opposed to this kind of idea and do not support a change in the law. Let's go Mark and then Sylvia.
So Don? Don? How about now? Okay, I'm going to speak really loud, John. So back to the second WIPP accident. Have they actually found out what happened yet? Have they actually photographed the barrel that exploded or whatever happened?
Yes, they have pictures of the one drum number 68660 from Los Alamos that clearly let radioactivity out, but they still haven't determined how much radioactivity was in the drum. Nobody has actually calculated all of that radioactivity in the more than 8,000 feet of underground, what's in the exhaust shaft going up to the surface, what's out on the surface, to see whether it's close to matching the total. So DOE has an idea that they want to let people believe that they know what happened and know it can't happen again, but there's no reason for anybody to believe that because they haven't done the most basic things of saying, well, they have said they don't know how much radioactivity was in this Los Alamos drum. Back to that point of, do they really know that drum and other drums, what's in all of the underground? And the answer is, well, no. In some cases, they have better ideas than others. But they also, of course, don't know how much of whatever was in there actually came out. It looks to a lot of people, including people more technical than I, that have looked at it, that what came out to do all this contamination had to be from more than one drum. So all of that is still not known. But the Department of Energy would like everybody to think we know everything. Trust us. The famous words that we heard earlier tonight. You trusted us that nothing bad was ever going to happen. There was never going to be a fire. There was never going to be a radiation release. Oops. That didn't work out so well. But trust us again. We now know what happened. We're changing our ways. And everything is going to be okay.
We made some mistakes in the past, but now.
We won't do it again.
Mistakes
So,
were made.
Sylviana, last question.
Yeah, right, it's never happened.
Didn't I hear something about some concern about the present fracking industry getting perilously close to the WIPP site?
They're already under the website.
So,
Right injection.
So this is the WIPP site, 16 square miles. As this says, there are more than 100, all of these black dots all around are active oil and gas wells all around the WIPP site as we speak. And there are more and more all the time. And 3 miles east over here, there are wells that are starting to do fracking. So, and again, over time, there's going to be more and more fracking. These are fairly new wells, so they don't have to go into secondary and tertiary recovery yet. Fracking, they can get oil and gas out just through the normal processes of drilling and having it come out. They don't need to frack. But over time, yes, there's going to be fracking going on very close to the site. So again, this is one of these reasons that regardless of the recent problems, this is something that a lot of people always knew this was a technically bad place to be doing this anyway.
Aren't they already injecting brine though right next to or even maybe slant or under?
Well, they're doing slant drilling. They're not doing so much brine injection there yet, deep well injection. There is some going on, but mostly they're hauling that away and leaving it in the tanks and pits on the surface. Okay, thank you all very much for your... How many are we going to see next Wednesday at EPA? Good answer. Either afternoon or evening or both. Please come. Tell EPA, protect us. Don't listen to DOE. Don't recertify WIPP. Thanks a lot.